Hey, what's going on, everyone? Check out what's coming up this week on Legacies.
I can't bring my dab rig with me?
You can bring a pocket-sized dab rig, but you're bringing glass on the boat. Like, just no. No. It's the most up-to-date as far as, I don't know, because you've got a smaller team doing it. It's yourself and a few people, right? Like, it's...
Yeah, we are busy. There's a lot of news. I'll tell you what, I wish these financial reports had become the bane of my existence.
Pepperiness. Our audience is going to go, no, you fucking idiot. That's not... Hey, welcome to Legacies, everyone. I'm your host, Tom Ritchie, joined as usual by Mr. Wesley Bowles. Wes, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I almost feel like saying, sorry, this episode brought to you by Mendo. Blaze across the chest.
Yeah. It's episode 25. Can you believe it?
One more and we're halfway.
Part of it's like, oh my God, it's only episode 25. And then others are like, the other half of me is like, holy shit, like 20. I don't know. It's episode 25 already, but it feels like we've been doing.
Yeah. I look at some of these other podcasts, and as I scroll through them, like Joe Rogan, for instance, and anyone that's tuned in knows I'm a huge fan of Joe Rogan. I'm not trying to be him by any means. We're not trying to reproduce what he does. People have made comments on the red curtains. But, like there's like fucking almost 3,000 episodes or more in there. And I'm like, holy smokes. Like how often, I don't know that much about the Joe Rogan podcast, but I know when he came into Spotify, they brought others in, but like, did they record once a week, twice a week? Like, I don't know, man.
I believe they're once a week, but he started that back in 2009. It was
yeah.
Christmas Eve 2009 when that podcast started.
Wow.
So they've been
and
going.
How long did he run before he was part of Spotify or bought by Spotify? That was like $100 million deal, wasn't it?
I'm not sure when the Spotify deal actually took place, but the 2009 was prior to Spotify.
Got it.
But that's how long he's been doing it for. So
wow.
it's. I mean, even the guys at Tom Segura, the guys at YMH and stuff like that, they've been doing that 10 years.
Wow.
We're
almost 6 months in.
25 weeks. That's where.
And some mornings getting the studio ready, getting in the studio. I'm stressed out. This morning I was a little stressed out, and I just need to take my breather. Everyone who was watching, just take. If shit's stressing you out, just take a woosah. Yeah. There was a Seinfeld reference. It was the Serenity Now. And he's that doesn't work, eh? Eventually, he just fucking blows.
I can imagine, though, it's going to be us at episode, 500, 690 or whatever it is. And we're all just going to be here like that. Like, excise tax still a problem.
Yeah. Have you been listening at all, Health Canada? What the fuck is still going on here? Yeah, I hear you. I connected with Jay briefly on Jay from Mendo, Jay Schwartz, on Monday, I think it was. He sent over a nice little care pack, and he's like, you don't have to talk about that on the podcast. And I'm like, no. I said, I'm becoming a bit of a prima donna. Like I need a new shirt every time. I'm like, where's the wardrobe department? And he joked, and he's like, don't worry, it'll come. But obviously, we're massive fans of Mendo. I put the shirt on though. Tanya washed it. I put the shirt on, and I'm like, whoa, do I need to lose some weight? Like, what's going on? It's a little tight. So I had to stretch it all out. But she's like, I like it. I'm like, okay, I don't mind it. What I do love about it, though, is the Mendo shirt. I've got a Mendo shirt. And Jay's like, wear it when you're working out, whatever. And I'm like, nah, I'm going to wear it on the show. And he sent over, there's some products in there. And we got to talking about, so you remember, I don't know how far back, but they used to support a lot of various LPs, and some LPs could be sitting on some great product, but maybe 1-2 kilos left or something like that. And they would, assuming it was of the quality that Mendo would put their stamp on, they would bring that in and they repackage it under Mendo Select. And he's like, well, that's the way it used to be, but now we curate. So we actually source product specifically to put under our Mendo Select banner, but on the medical side. Because as you know, Mendo Select has product in market on the recreational side. Not sure where all the distribution is yet. We'll figure that out, but I know it's available in Ontario. And one of the standouts is their Durban Poison, which is a total OG. But he sent over some, and they're under the Mendo. I was smart enough to put it. All looks like Mendo Select at this point. It is all Mendo Select, but there's Jezebel, Amore probably. and frosted Oreos.
I opened that Jezebel just to. Here's my problem when I get those.
You want me to
like
open
that.
one and smell? I won't pull it out.
You could smell. Is that the one with the 4% terps on it? 3.99 or whatever.
Which one was it? The Jezebel? Yeah, 3.95 terps.
Yeah, that's the one I opened first, and I was like, "Ooh, this thing."
Okay, well let's crack one of these. But what I loved is like on the back, in case this information, I would assume it's like. I love Mendo for the education purposes. Like there's so much in there, but also they deep dive into the product and provide you with some good information about, where it's coming from. So in this case, you said it was the Jezebel. So let's do that. So Jezebel, for instance, this is 7 grammer. Thank you, Jay, by the way. I will get to this. I haven't had a chance, as you could just imagine. But hang dried, never irradiated. Let's see, craft cultivated indoors by Coots Canna. Okay. Coots Canna, we've heard a lot of great things for. So here's the thing. We know Jay very well. And if it's going to go in a bag with Mendo Select on it, it's going to be good. So let me do this now. I'll do this just live. I won't pull it out. Watch it just.
Yeah. Just.
By the way, it's not even. I hate these Mylar bags. It has nothing to do against who's sourcing what or anything. I'm not a fan at all, and I never have. I can smell it. I don't even have the bag open.
I watch friends struggle with those bags when they try to open them, and I just laugh.
Well, and it's funny because Mike Elkin from last week, if you ever watched any of his, not really reviews, but thoughts, he just cuts the fucking top off. He doesn't even bother with it. It smells really good. Really good. Smell, it's dank, that's for sure. Does it tell us the terps that are on it? What's the most prominent? I smell, I hate saying terp names.
Yeah, because you just butcher them.
Is it beta carophyllene?
Carophyllene, I think that's what it is. That's the one.
There's that, and I think that's the one that's responsible for that pepperiness. Our audience is going to go, "No, you fucking idiot!" It's not.
I think
they're going to fucking cream me on this. Listen, I am not an expert. You've seen me wear shirts that say "Show me your terps." I wish you could smell this. Like it's.
I know smell-o-vision. Smell-o-vision.
Yeah,
I know.
Smell-o-vision.
Is that it's also high in myrcene too, isn't it? Myrcene, whatever it is.
It could be. I don't. Oh, it does. Sorry, it does say this. Farnesene is the most prominent, and then carophyllene, and then limonene.
Oh, limonene. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I mean the farnesene is 1.3. I think the jury's still out a little bit on, because we had Rick on from High North Labs. And he went, did this fucking zip. Did
you break the zipper?
Yeah, it's not going to do it. Now I got to fucking.
We're going to hire an executive assistant to have there for you, just to open those for you.
Do you know what needs to happen, honestly, is I would love, we've talked about this before, the whole bulk barn model. I know it's not at Matt, and I used a bunch of fucking Sharpie all over the THC logo too. Now it's all over me. Anyways, Jay, thank you. I love the little sea cans, sea crates, or mason jars. I love jars, period. I know why Mylar. I mean, I get it. It's industry standard pretty much. And especially when you get into like the 7 grammers or anything like that, or anything bigger, it needs to be in that. But anyways, you're going to try that. And I just happen to have, next week might be a little bit more consumable for me. Obviously taking a couple or a week off, although never truly off, which gives me a bit of fucking anxiety. Entrepreneurs do not, you know this, you deal with this all the time. Entrepreneurs do not do well with being away. As much as we understand the value of disconnecting, dude, we're in the middle of so many projects, and I feel like an ass, but I'm dragging you away from your fucking 12,000 screens. And
well, here's the thing. Yeah, it's supposed to be like a vacation, right? Time to rest. But to me, I look at it more as what's actually going to help me rest is I probably am going to work on a lot of the stuff we have to do for this super secret project we're working on.
Yeah.
But because I keep getting, we keep getting pulled into other things, and then we do the podcast Wednesday, Thursday, and
Tom's asking about tech questions all the time. Why is my internet not working?
Yeah, this will be a week where I can literally focus on that and not be interrupted by anything else, and that will actually
feel like a vacation for you. I know at night you like to throw your
saying?
headphones on and get some lo-fi on there and just jam out and get your shit done.
Yeah,
and then I see the 11:30 posts coming in. Look what I built. Look what I did. And it's always good. Sometimes I'm blasted out of my mind and ready for bed. But next week I've got a little bit more consumable. We'll bring in
I remember messaging you last night. Actually, I think it was like 10:30, and I said, "Hey, are you online to give some input on this? What we just built here?"
And I'm up, but I think my notifications were off or something.
No. I specifically remember last night. It was you had the offline. We use Slack for our internal team chat.
Yeah,
and you were offline, and then all of a sudden I sent that message, and 2 minutes later I saw Thomas turn notifications on.
Oh, really? It must have been coincidence that it was time to I've got it set. Yeah, I don't do that shit to you. No, I'm just as chomping at the bit all the time. It's one of those fear of missing out, but also I don't know, man. I'm designed for efficiency, and I think that those that hear me say that, what it means. Like, routine is everything. It drives my wife insane in some aspects, but in others, because you can just get so much more accomplished, right? I'm always pre-thinking, like, the day, what tasks need to be done, and not just work related. It could be, okay, when we're done, I got to fit this in, I got to do this, I got to do this. Even routines just around the house, trying to get stuff done. And yeah, it's I don't know. I think it's beneficial, but it's also it's difficult for those that live inside routine when you try to shake stuff up, like going on a week vacation. Yeah, at least we have lots of clips. We have lots of clips we can break.
Lots of clips to share.
We're taking a break next week, everyone, but you're going to see some probably unposted clips we have not had a chance to break out separately for socials yet.
Yeah, and I've got we'll update everyone else on this as well too. I guess is so our YouTube channel. We're going to start. Breaking out some longer segments from previous episodes and just kind of resurfacing those. We've done a lot of episodes now, 25, and we want to pull out 10-minute segments here or there. We understand what it's like having to watch. Don't always have the time to watch a full hour and a half or 2 hour. Hell, last week's episode was almost 3 hours.
3 hours, yeah.
So we understand that people can't necessarily always tune in for those. So we're going to start breaking out some segments into some different playlists for you, so that you can jump in and, hey, I just want to watch the interview portion. So here's all the interviews. Different things like that. So we're going to start breaking that content out for you, and then you can enjoy it in your own little segments. So this should be fun.
You know what? It's really motivating, invigorating. Is last week especially, we received so many messages. I know you get them in LinkedIn. I get them in LinkedIn. We get them through our highflyer.ca, our support chat. It feels really good. To know that we're just having the right conversations. It's really nice to hear from everyone. So don't ever be afraid to reach out. We try to respond to everyone that reaches out.
I think what's nice about a lot of those messages too is not just that, hey, we're doing a good job and people enjoy the podcast, but the affirmation of hey, I'm really enjoying your selection of guests. The people you're bringing on are bringing value to me listening. Like, I'm getting a lot from the people you're having on, or I've known these people a long time, and these are the right people to be having on, and that's validating as well. It's nice to hear that the audience is responding. Yeah,
and there's no shortage of cool people. Speaking of which, we've got David Brown from Stratcann on today. We played cat and mouse for a while, but we finally got a chance to connect. We finally made it happen. He's coming in. He'll be on after our break, but we're not even close to that yet. I do want to ask you. I was having a little bit of a freak out. So, that I'm not US focused on politics by any means, but I mean, what a fucking shit show. It's made me tune in a lot more to the Canadian side. But I want to ask you this, because I think I had messaged you. I even put it in my calendar, the Trump-Musk conversation, not interview.
Oh yeah.
Conversation. So John Prentice actually called me right before that. And I'm like, what's going on? I got to get on the live. He's like, what? I'm like, I'm trying to get onto this live space with Trump and Musk. He's like, oh, I wanted to watch that too. So I'm talking to him through like Bluetooth, and I'm trying to get in, and it wouldn't load. And then I message you, and you're like, well, I think he put out a message saying it had a cap on it. I'm like, what the fuck? This guy is the real world Tony Stark, and he's got a cap. So I know what ended up happening. And there was this DDoS attack, and like,
yeah, because Elon Musk had done stress testing the night before with the engineers at Twitter, and he had stress tested it up to 8 million concurrent users. So 8 million people at a time should have been able to log on and watch that. And then turned out later that they were also suffering this massive DDoS attack and delayed the whole thing by about 40 minutes. So, but it went off. Like it did go off, and
well, there's over a million. What I love is, so I didn't listen to the entire thing. I started Stone Cold Sober. It ran on. Tanya was, well into her research that she does every night, and I just kept listening. So she was in another room. I kept listening. I go outside and I blast a doob. I come in here and I'm sitting and listening. So one, I love that it was a real conversation. Listen, anyone that's listening, especially if you tune in from the US, which I don't know if we have a huge audience there, but I'm not one side. Okay. I do lean a little bit more towards Trump. Chastise me all you want, but I think there's as crazy as is. I've been following Trump for a long, long time. I've said this for like apprentice days, business accomplishments. Is he a whack job? Yes, 100% he is. Has he done things wrong? Yes, absolutely. So have I. So has Wes. So have you. So what I loved about it, it was, as far as I could tell, unscripted. It's just a conversation. But I sat there listening, and then I started to dawn on me. I'm thinking about Trudeau and Poilievre and everything going on in the UK and everything going on in Australia. And I'm going, these are the fucking people that we choose to rule and govern this world? Like, what the fuck is going on? That was and it was one of those, when you're high, you get into those deep thought moments for a second, right? And I'm like, why? Why do we do this to ourselves? But there was one point in the conversation where Elon, so Trump had talked about the need still for fossil fuels, and we don't need to rush into renewable energies. And Elon brought up a very good point. He's like, yeah, we don't, you don't just shut it off and start. We need to transition there for a future that, would have a planet for our kids, and, renewable energies need to be there. I'm thinking, Trump's going to start talking about renewable energies and the science and the need and all of this with Musk. Like, are you fucking kidding me? That's like a gnat trying to understand a human. Like, it just didn't make sense. But anyways, what I saw was all of the fallout where, the very biased media, I won't mention which ones they are because we have them in Canada, but I do have a question for you when it comes to this, is, oh, Trump was slurring, he was doing this, and all this was, can you believe this conversation? And look at, and they're editing and clipping. Anyone could take hours and make me sound like a total ass and douche as well, I'm sure. But
I've got a sizzle reel. I've got a sizzle reel of that coming up. Don't worry.
Oh my God, I can't wait to hear that. But I think it just gets blown so out of proportion. And I'm not saying X is a savior by any means, but our mainstream media, I can't fucking trust it at all, both Canada and the US and Australia and the UK. It's all controlled as far as I'm concerned. Call me a conspiracy theorist if you will. I don't care. But it's blatantly fucking obvious. It's so obvious. But, so then, because I watch and listen to some of the different stuff that's available, some of it conspiracy, right? And I don't think InfoWars and Alex Jones is as much conspiracist as he was labeled as in the early days.
Yeah, there's some shit on there. There's some, Alex Jones is,
of course. But I mean, I watched something with a guest on there yesterday, and he was talking about, the deep state, and really it's a small group of people that have been controlling things for a long time. But I just started thinking, why is there no format in Canada to address similar things that are going on? Like, and if there is, please share with me, or audience share with me as well. Like, I don't know. Like, you've got, Tucker Carlson that's left the media and he's like this. Glenn Beck even. I mean, he was Fox or whoever he was, but we've got all these very prominent individuals in the US that now they have very successful shows. They're obviously not on mainstream media. They're not on any of those types of networks. They live on X and online. What do we have in Canada that challenges, any topic really? Like, is there anything that is done to that quality, format? I don't know of any.
Yeah, I'm not 100%. I don't know if I could speak to that either. Like you're
It.
saying, is there a Canadian Alex Jones or a Canadian
and
Tucker
I don't
Carlson?
even want to label it as I just someone that's
but
not afraid to stand up and call bullshit and ask those hard questions
and challenge. Right? Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
I'm not saying we want to go there by any means, but I mean these conversations need to be had. You need to have the guests on that you can challenge and ask and really just get people thinking. Right. And being that there is a platform available to post that, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of negative shit too. If your scroll feeds on X are feeding you certain algorithms based on what you've watched previously, it can be a very negative place, a very dark place. And you don't want to dwell in there by any means.
But that's part of, I think, the appeal to me for a platform like that is that it's clear that it's not all one-sided, right? If I was only getting, like I go on TikTok sometimes, and obviously it's a very different platform, but it's a happy-go-lucky place for me. Like I'm scrolling through there, and it's clearly targeted and aimed at and a platform like Twitter is you're getting, you get the information on there to make up your own mind, I think is what, you know, you have to be smart enough to go, I don't know if I trust what I'm reading right now, and then continue reading into it, but it gives you both sides of that.
I do like that X has like community notes and checks and balances where, you know, you can disprove. I mean, there's been things that I'll even just share internal with our team and, you know, immediately you're like, that's like 4 years old. And, you know, I'm either lazy or don't understand X well enough. But anyways, I'm just curious, like what is in Canada or available to Canadians, because we've got an election coming up. There's a lot of nefarious bullshit going on behind the scenes. There was as well during, you know, what was it? The trucker convoys and I don't even want to call them, they're peaceful protests. There's just a lot of bullshit going on. And we as Canadians need to start paying a lot more attention to who we're putting in to govern, the parties that are going to be governing. And it's not just about the cannabis industry, folks. This is about everything. This is our freedoms, the way of life, you know, inflation. Like if anyone thinks that US is outspending Canada, no, we're going into debt faster and fast. We print money just as fast, if not faster. And we need to be seriously paying attention to it. So we're not going to become a political podcast by any means, but the more that I dig into it, I will share my opinions from time to time. And I would love to hear everyone else's as well. Let's have a conversation about it. I don't know enough about it. And I think that's kind of what's happened over the years is, like, God, our youngest generation with voting power right now, they're the vast majority of them, no offense to a lot of them, but you're not paying attention at all. My parents paid a lot more attention. My great-grandparents, my grandparents, they paid way more attention than even I do. But as those generations go down, this is exactly what they want. Right?
Distractions. Yeah.
Distraction, less votes, bought votes, by the way. Something dawned on me yesterday about all the new driver's licenses being issued. Someone might be voting on their behalf. And I don't know if that's true in Canada, but I certainly want to dig into the statistics as to how many new driver's licenses have been issued over the last 2 years. Is it in status with what has been previously or historically? I don't know. Anyways, enough about politics. That's fucking stuff. It intrigues me, but it also infuriates me at times.
Can we, yeah, I know. So should we switch to maybe some little more positive news from the industry?
Positive. So, other than Health Canada, we'll discuss this with David, okay? Because Health Canada is considering pesticide use changes and they want to hear from the public. So if you don't know, follow Stratcann. We'll figure that out too with David. But go ahead.
Yeah. So I want to do a quick shout out to, if you haven't checked it out today, Stok'd. We've had Lisa Bigioni on before, owner of Stok'd Cannabis Dispensary here in Ontario. They've got about 4 locations right now. They switched over today. They got a brand new website. It looks absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. And, you know, they've got an upgraded menu. And the big thing for me is this website is SEO optimized. Like, it is so ready to go.
So important.
Everyone who's using, and I hate to call it out, but, you know, a lot of people are using Dutchie, right? And rightfully so. It's allowed a lot of people to get up. It's allowed a lot of companies and retailers to get up to speed very quickly, get their shops online and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But I think it's been lacking a lot from a customization standpoint and really having your brand kind of stand out. Lisa over at Stok'd has gone with BreadStack, and those guys have done a phenomenal job with this website.
That's a Canadian company, right?
I believe so.
I think they're out of
BreadStack
Vancouver
is,
or BC.
but they understand the importance of having your website stand out, and that SEO, that SEO play of making sure that it's a gorgeous site. You guys got to check out the new Stok'd website.
One of the frustrating, and I have some questions for you on this, because there's various solutions available. I'll just say solutions, because some are POS, some tie into your online menuing, some tie into your website itself. Dutchie's we knew our first experience with Dutchie is when we were with Akerna and working with MJ Freeway and Metric. Fuck, I Heart Jane. Yeah, we know the US side too. But anyways, Dutchie was a front runner. Is it Libsyn, the Libsyn brothers. It was much different when those two were actually CEO and COO, I think, and then they were forced out. But anyways, I think it just became very bland for me as I would search a website, and then I would land on something when I wanted to look at their products. It was the same fucking thing all the time. And I'm like, there's no differentiation. I didn't know the value in it. I wasn't like, again, I'm not a technical guy. I didn't understand if the SEO was there or was not there. But obviously you've worked a little bit closer to this and know Lisa much better, and what her struggles and pain points were and why she had chose BreadStack. When you sent the link this morning to check it out, I was like, holy fuck, this is a game changer. Like complete night and day compared to Dutchie. We're not endorsing BreadStack by any means. They don't pay us to say this. I love what I saw though. I don't know enough about their features or anything like that. I love that if it is, double check. I'm pretty sure it's a Canadian company. Love that it's a Canadian company. They understand our industry, which is as close as there's parallels. It's vastly different than the US, especially in the context that it's federal. So when you're doing a search, you're typically searching all of Canada. You want your SEO to be optimized, obviously. You want your sites to be responsive, mobile friendly, et cetera, et cetera. But and I don't even know the statistics as to how many people are previewing and looking at products online before they go in. It doesn't matter. The fact is you need a nice UX, UI that you can customize. And it sounds like you can customize BreadStack, so that makes sense. Performance, I can tell you this. Performance, even just based on mobile. I had to go over to a site that I know runs on Dutchie. Again, I'm not flogging Dutchie. It's not that. But I couldn't believe the performance difference.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's snappy as hell. Really, really nice. Super good.
It may not sound important to those of our retail friends that are listening. It may not sound important, but believe me, it is. And it reminds me of a story, actually. It's about follow the follower. Have you ever heard this story? So the story goes that a shop foreman back in the 50s or 40s, he'd walk the main dig every morning on his way to the plant. And he would stop out front of a watchmaker's shop, and he had grandfather clocks, and he would set his pocket watch to that grandfather clock every day. And the shop owner noticed him the one day, and he comes out and he goes, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, I'm the foreman at the plant, and I'd have to blow the quitting whistle at 5 o'clock every day. So I just double check to make sure my pocket watch is on time here before I head to the plant each day." And the shop owner laughs and he goes, "I've been setting that grandfather clock to that whistle every day for the last 10 years. The point being is that you don't know who you're following necessarily. And when you follow the follower, you may think you're doing things right, but you're technically not. And you could be off by a couple minutes or you could be off by 6 months. The fact is that Dutchie was very prominent. They figured out a solution out of the gate very early, and they got a lot of traction. But it doesn't mean it's the only solution. And I think that, for companies trying to differentiate themselves now, right? Or whether you're a cannabis brand or you're a retailer, POS, whatever you're trying to do, just take the time. And if you're not an expert, find an expert. Bring someone in that can help you understand why there's importance of SEO, right? So anyways, I loved it. Love what I saw. It's not an endorsement for BreadStack by any means, but love to see Canadian companies doing Canadian work.
Yeah, agreed. I'm going to stick the link to the Stok'd website down in the description.
Yeah, do that. Throw BreadStack up too for anyone that's. There's retailers coming on all the time.
Well, I mean,
right?
they're getting new features out of this too, right? Like they have the ability to do they've got all the deliveries set up now, which is awesome.
Oh wow!
And like even the minor things to help convert those carts, right? Is Interact e-transfers. They can pay with Interact e-transfer, which is huge.
Right.
Which is huge. Yeah, really good stuff I've seen so far. I'm excited to see. Again, that's first iteration. You know what it's like. They'll be iterating on site design and stuff like that probably over the next couple months and into the future. But it's looking really good. If that's the that's the run out the door, awesome, really good.
Very cool. Very cool. So a couple, let's not forget. So Canada Golf Classic is coming up, but Lake and Bake is coming up as well. That's this weekend, Saturday. So we'll be there. Looking forward to that. If you haven't got your tickets, I don't know why you haven't yet. There's a very small amount left from what I understand. I'm not just saying that to say, rush and get your tickets. It's like less than 100 for sure. And I think that was last week. So there's probably less than 50.
I'm going to check right now. I want to see how many.
I don't know if it tells you the ticket count, but if you have not got your tickets, you can check out lakeandbake.ca. I think that's what the website is. It's .ca or .com. But anyways, Google Lake and Bake. Use code Legacies to get 25% off. We'll be there. A lot of cool brands, a lot of cool people. It's going to be Harbor Cruise party. Consumption is available, both alcohol and cannabis. Don't bring your bongs and stuff like that, though. The captain of the ship, honestly, the captain of the ship, which is the River Gambler, he doesn't want to see that shit. Keep it somewhat discreet, okay? The smell in the air is fine, but leave your bongs,
I can't bring my dab rig with me?
You can bring a pocket-sized dab rig, but you're bringing glass on the boat. Like, just no glass on the boat. That's simple. And we finally had a chance to meet with Katie Pringle, Tether, right? So Marigold PR, prominent in the space, been doing stuff for a long time. We're huge fans of Tether and Tether events and bud tender sampling and brand sampling, and like you see them going off constantly. There's a Tether here, there's a Tether there, and they're doing stuff with, I think, even Stratcann and growing conversations or growing relationships. I apologize, one of those, but very cool. Cool to hear her story. At some point, we need to get her on, but looking forward to potentially doing some stuff with her because, man, I just love that crew.
Well, she was a winner in my book as soon as she recommended the restaurant we went to for lunch because that pizza was fucking fire.
Yeah, it was really good. It was the closest pizza I've had in Canada so far to Italy. It was wood-fired, thin crust, bubbled up, outside. It was good. And we ate I wasn't going to eat the whole thing. I saw Jazz finish it. I wasn't either. I saw Jazz finish it, and I'm like, okay, well, if Jazz can finish it, I can finish it. Fuck. I was stuffed. So full.
The only thing that was a bummer was the guys that sounded like they were building the pyramids of Egypt on the roof of the building.
Jeez. What the hell was going on? I didn't even reflect it in the tip. It wasn't their fault, but come on.
No. So loud. We're trying to have a conversation.
Oh my God. It was loud. Really loud. Katie was visibly irritated. But I mean, they're softer spoken, right? Like all of a sudden, it seemed like every time she went to say something, they'd start banging on the ductwork or whatever the fuck it was. It was loud though. But anyways, it was nice to get to have lunch with her and Jazz. Anyways, okay. I'm excited. I've done my research, but I'm really interested in hearing David Brown's story. And I don't even know where this is going to go. I'm not directing it. All of our interviews are unscripted. We come in just knowing the guests, knowing the research, knowing their accolades, what they've worked on, what they are working on. David is a different dude, right? So early days with Lyft. I want to find out the catalyst or what pushed him into the cannabis industry. The regulated side, because he started with Lyft. He was doing, I think, director of communications, and then he had started, I think, simultaneously. He started doing those stuff with Stratcann, but then he was working with Health Canada. That's a lot of insight. And we see the articles. I want to know how big the team is. I want to know how the hell they keep their finger on the pulse, how they get all the relevant and pertinent information out as timely as they do, but also be interesting just to hear like what is working, what's not working, what should be reformed, what should we leave alone, where do we focus our energy, that sort of stuff. But also, he's just fucking cool. Just a cool guy. He's been in the industry a long time, smart as hell. Anyways, we'll have David Brown on as soon as we return after this break. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're joined by David Brown of Stratcann. Finally.
Hey guys,
how you doing, David?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. You're joining us from, what do we call it? Lower Mainland?
Sure. Yeah. Lower Mainland, BC, a little outside Vancouver.
Lower Mainland, BC. Well, it looks sunny. Well, Wes and I are always going on about the weather. We're starting to feel like two old dudes sitting in rockers.
That's what happens.
That's
what happens. It sneaks up on you.
It does. It does for sure. David, thanks for joining Legacies. We've exchanged some emails. We finally got a chance to meet. We know you're busy. We're busy, but we're glad to have you because we like having people that are much smarter than us on the show.
That usually helps.
Especially ones that
when you get them, you let me know.
I knew you'd have a fucking comeback like that of some sort. Well, listen, we've got a ton of questions, some about the industry, some not maybe about the industry, but let's first start. We'd like to understand the background of our guests and how they came into the industry. Because I know that yours dates back quite a ways. Advocate for legalization, working with, I guess at the time, policymakers or ones that would at least be forming those up. And that was going back, 2015, 16. But I'm going to leave it for you to explain that because we really want to understand that for anyone that doesn't understand.
Sure. Yeah. I in a nutshell, I started on this current path that I'm on in the industry probably around 2012 and started working with an online publication covering different aspects of the cannabis industry. Also following a lot of the exciting policy that we were seeing at that time in Washington and Colorado and the US. And then in early 2014, I partnered up with the founder of Lift Cannabis. And that really kind of started me on this trajectory of policy work and news, following the evolution of what was a brand new legal commercial market at that point, and quite controversial. Obviously, it was sort of it was the introduction of the MMPR. The beginning of commercial production and moving away from what we were seeing with sort of patient focused production. And I worked at Lyft then for about 4 years and watched that company grow into one of the dominant cannabis media platforms as well as the event space. In 2018, I was lucky enough to sort of get recruited to be a senior policy advisor for Canada's legalization and regulation branch. And so I spent 2 years there, 1 year kind of in the buildup to legalization, and then 1 year after legalization, and had really great experience learning how the sausage is made. It was quite fascinating. Met a lot of great people, but more importantly, got a lot of really good insight into that side of things and some of the nuance that goes into the regulations that I found quite interesting. Previous to that, I had been covering the evolution of Bill C-45, the Canada's legalization bill, very closely, following all the meetings. And so on one hand, I was following it from that side. And then I was really lucky to have the opportunity to kind of, step over that threshold, I guess, and see it on the other side. Yeah. So that was fascinating. And then I had my fill of government work and was very happy to leave after a couple years. And I really wanted to get back into media and events. It's what I like doing in this space. And so I started Stratcann in early 2020. And so we've been going kind of full speed ahead since then. Gosh, what is this, 2025? So, oh no, it's 2024, I guess.
2024, we're close enough to 2025.
When's this one coming out?
Though. Yeah. We're almost at the 5-year anniversary for you. Wow. Okay. So that's a lot to unpack. The MMPR I'm familiar with. And I don't think that many draw a line, especially consumers these days, right? They consume cannabis, they go into a dispensary, they've got some sort of retail network, some favorites, whatever, favorite products, favorite brands, they buy it, and that's it. But they don't necessarily spend a lot of time connecting the dots as to how Canada came to Bill C-45, how the cannabis regulations rolled out in the Cannabis Act. But a lot of that stems from the MMPR, and even previously to that, the MMAR, which is where I cut my teeth. So I do have a question though, because you were focused on what was going on in the US 2012, but I mean, we can go back even further, right? Because California was 96, 97, somewhere in there, where medical marijuana had become at least legalized or decriminalized, or they had some sort of framework, I think, at the time, but that cascaded to the other areas in the US, correct?
Yeah, it's, there's a bit more to it than that. Colorado also had some medical framework pretty early on. Okay. California, it was around 2003 that California had a big push with their medical legalization that That's where we saw a lot of counties allowing up to 99 plants per patient. You saw people clustering patients together and creating these kind of mega farms that were quasi-state legal. Absolutely wasn't, didn't start with Colorado and Washington, but those were, the first two states to formally legalize non-medical cannabis, which was obviously a really big deal. And part of what I was following there and thought was interesting was, that transition from what was sort of a cobbled together gray area, state legal medical sort of thing, into formal regulations for non-medical commercial production and sale. And I found that quite fascinating. And so, I was aware of Canada's MMAR system. I was a cannabis consumer and aware of kind of some of the nuances to some of the background there and the legal fights that had led to that. And I remember coming across one of the first drafts in Gazette 1 of the MMPR. This would have been, I want to say, late 2012, early 2013. Yeah. And I read through it and I could see, what they were trying to do. And it just seemed like the obvious direction that things were going to go, especially in the context of what was going on in Colorado and Washington, some of the challenges they were having trying to transition what was built as really essentially non-commercial production. These were very similar to the MMAR, where it was, about patients producing their own, and it, slowly built up into something where a lot of those growers were then supplying dispensaries, which were serving as a more direct outlet for patients. There's a lot of obviously a lot of pretty famous court cases for people that are aware of that built up some of those rights. But I could see the direction that the government was saying. It seemed to me they were saying, okay, this is going to get a lot bigger than we're going to be able to control. We need to create some more robust regulatory avenues. And so reading those initial regulations, I just saw, okay, we're going to be in a place in 5 or 10 years when Canada inevitably legalizes as well. And this sort of thing will likely be the framework. Whether I was, very smart to notice that or, just lucky, that's hard to say, but it definitely is the direction that things took. So I think that was kind of the obvious framework to see the direction that legalization would take in Canada.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were paying attention to it, right? Which is important. I would say you were smart enough as well, but paying attention and understanding the way it was forming. I mean, you had, straddling the border and understanding the frameworks and how things were rolling out there. Were you able to, so kind of reading between the lines there, you're going, okay, this will be the state of the cannabis industry potentially in the next, 10 years, and as we transition. But were you able to help influence or at least have serious conversations with policymakers to say, look, this is, I've seen this is what was going on, this works, this doesn't work, but were you able to have any influence at all, or was it just completely off?
Yeah, initially
off limits at the time.
Yeah, I mean, initially I was really just covering it from a news perspective, kind of observing, documenting. But through that process, I think, built up my connections, built up the conversations I had, and got to a place where I could have conversations with municipal, provincial, federal representatives and leaders in the build up to that. And I think that's part of what got me to a place where I could be asked to join the regulation team, was an understanding that, hey, this is someone who's kind of built up this knowledge from a different direction than we've been looking.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why they brought myself. It wasn't just me, it was many others that they brought in to sort of help them fill in those gaps of what they might be missing. And, I will also say that the policymakers that I was working with, brilliant people on the regulatory side, they spent a lot of time, many years, having those types of conversations, not just with people like me, but people a lot smarter than myself, a lot more deeply involved in this type of policy. So, I want to acknowledge that was, it wasn't something where just one day they flipped the switch and said, okay, we're going to legalize. Let's throw some random people on here. There, there was a lot of build up and thoughtfulness to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing, because when the Cannabis Act came about, everyone thought, oh, it's overnight. They made all these drastic decisions and wrote all these policies overnight. And it was not even close to that.
Yes.
There was a lot of lead up, a lot of investigation, a lot of feedback received from individuals like yourself that were close to it, but also just the public. Would you say in those days, was it more positive or negative, the conversations that were being had? Where were they focusing the most attention to? Like the positive outcomes, we can talk about taxation, but obviously economic benefits to the country and provinces. But was there more pro or more con? What was going on in those days?
I mean, it depends who you talk to. Obviously,
Okay.
a lot of the conversation in the cannabis community, as it were, at that point was, I think, pretty negative. A feeling that, this is big corporate guys in suits and government sort of taking this thing away from us. And, that's not certainly not entirely inaccurate perspective on things. At the same time, the government conversation from day one was always focused on framing this as a public health issue. Really not focusing on revenue generation. And if you go back to Trudeau's earliest statements on this, it was about, tight, strict control and regulation, not about the sort of things that we saw in the States, which were revenue generation and civil liberties. And in fact, there was a talk I gave. Part of what I did there was kind of outreach and at Health Canada, I mean to say, was community outreach. And so I would go and give these talks to different groups, First Nations and RCMP here in British Columbia and kind of community groups. And that was one of the things we always tried to juxtapose was when we look at the States, the conversation there was about revenue generation and to a degree, civil liberties and freedom. The conversation in Canada was always basically prohibition has failed to meet these goals. Legalizing and regulating, just like we do other controlled products, is probably a better approach to achieving many of those same goals. And those goals were keeping out of the hands of kids, keeping the black market away. But rather than pretending, we can somehow stamp out something, is more of an acknowledgement of, okay, people are going to use this substance. It's not an endorsement of that substance. It's an acknowledgement that people are going to choose to use the substance. So the government has an obligation to ensure that they have the ability to access it from, clean, safe, regulated sources.
Which for the most part has been successful thus far. We still complain about the black market. And I want to touch on the article because Wes and I were going to do this pre-guest, which was you, about, the rise and really just oversight of, there's still a lot of illegal dispensaries going on. We'll get to that though. And it's frustrating, but at the same time, it has curbed some of it as we've seen. But I do have a question. So was it under the MMPR? What was the prairie? Remember when the air quote government produced our weed?
Prairie
what was that
plant
again?
systems, PPS.
Prairie plant systems. That's what it was. And are you familiar with that enough to speak to that? Because I'd like everyone to understand the access and the way, because I don't know enough about it. I do know it existed. And I know it was part of the MMPR during those days, but that's about as far as my knowledge goes with it.
Yeah, there's probably a couple little pieces that I might be missing. I haven't studied up on that in a while, but I recall at the time, PPS was one of the initial contractors that was actually pre-MMPR. There was forget which court case it was, but a court case that basically said, okay, the government has to also provide supply. And so this contract was given to PPS. I think that was the sort of famous farm they had in the cave in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
That evolved into the first LP under the MMPR. The MMPR, gosh, I want to say it was sometime in 2013 when they were first licensed. That company actually turned into CannyMed many years later. And then CannyMed got absorbed by, I'm pretty sure, Aurora. And so now CannyMed produces through Aurora's medical system. So they are still around. But that timeline in early 2013, we had, I want to say wish I had done my homework on this a little bit more. I want to say by mid 2014, we had about 13 licensed producers, with PPS being the first. Peace Naturals, I want to say, was like second or third.
Peace Naturals was right there. That's right.
Canna Farms here in British Columbia was one of the early ones.
Afria, I think Afria was in there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we saw that initial licensing where previous to the MMPR, the main way to access medical cannabis legally in Canada was getting an authorization from your medical provider to either grow it yourself, or then eventually you could also assign a designated grower. And that was, frankly, proliferating quite quickly and a challenge for the government to oversee. And so, the easy argument that most people will agree with was the MMPR was this big clunky corporate thing that tried to kind of ram that out of the way. And I think there's a lot of validity to that standpoint. At the same time, from a policy standpoint, I think it was important for the government to this is getting a little out of hand. This is going to be very difficult to oversee. This was under the Harper government, so it's not a surprise that they put something in place that was very sort of top-down authoritarian. A lot of the problems, so sort of jumping way ahead, but frankly, a lot of the problems that we're still facing in this industry are because of, it's built on that foundation. And if we wanted to be political, I find it's very easy to kind of go back and say, look, this was all developed. People forget that this was all developed by Stephen Harper. And it wasn't until 2015, 2016, when there was the opportunity.
I've never looked at it that way, but as soon as you said it, it makes a lot of sense. And in the early days, so I remember, MMAR, you could assign a designated grower. They transitioned to the MMPR. Was PPS an answer to, you can't find a designated grower, we're going to produce and supply it as well, so you have one more avenue of approach?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's what it was. Yeah, interesting. Okay, thanks for clarifying that, because I'm like, why the fuck did they get into the business of getting into weed? Like, what were they doing?
Yeah, the government did walk through the courts. The courts forced the government at every single stage. And people familiar with this certainly know, but it's an important point to remind, maybe the casual listeners that it absolutely was. Every single advancement on the medical side for many, many years was people fighting it, people getting arrested, and then people fighting it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then, looking at, and it was always the courts forcing it. I still remember, I think it was when the ACMPR was coming about and the Conroy case. So it was actually Kirk and John. I remember and I don't remember the exact language. I'm a doofus when it comes to this, but it was basically the court saying, you've had plenty of time, Health Canada. What are you doing? We need to move forward with this. You're not taking care of the patients that you've proclaimed are important to you. And then all of a sudden there was framework, but they had been working on this. Again, to that point, it's not like it was brand new and written overnight. It didn't become policy overnight in the regulations, right?
Okay. For the most part. Yeah, absolutely.
Although, right. Obviously, that's a big subject.
And an interesting tidbit, kind of going back, and if we want to sort of pile on the Harper administration, that initial group at Health Canada that was working on that was like 2 people. And by the time we got up to legalization, when I stepped it through the door in early 2018, there were hundreds of people in different branches dealing with different things. So, you can appreciate how, it was a much smaller program back then too, but it was very difficult to manage with just a handful.
Yeah, I bet. I wouldn't have thought of that. I still remember seeing when you had joined, I think it was a LinkedIn thing that, I was following your early days, Lyft, and into Ample when I was doing all this stuff and figuring out the legal side of the industry. And you had joined Health Canada. I'm like, why would he do that? Why would he do such a thing? But it makes sense. And we're glad that you did, because we know some of the outcome of your work there. Okay, so we'll fast forward a little bit into Lyft, because Lyft, God, in those days, like, we're talking, like, this is when Detonate was building out, $100,000+ booths. You guys were doing Van, you're doing Toronto. Were you doing Edmonton too? Where else were you guys doing?
Vancouver and Toronto, yeah.
Vancouver, and Toronto. They were the go-to events, right? Like, early days, a lot of money getting thrown around, right? A lot of investment dollars, these brands and companies, and they were blowing it out the way you would expect from, say, CES or something like that out of Las Vegas, right? What was that like, and what tempted you to join and become co-founder? It was co-founder, right, of Lyft, and you also handled communications and that sort of stuff as well. But what was it like in those days? Because we're so far removed from it now. We see Grow Up, we see Can Expo, we see some of the other ones going on. But Lyft was a different beast.
Yeah, I think, Tyler Sukajoff was the founder of Lyft. And his general idea, when we met, we both liked the idea of building a strain review platform for that commercialized MMPR that we saw. We both kind of saw, okay, this is the direction things are going. It certainly wasn't... was inspired, I think, by, you could look at how Weed Maps or Leafly were serving the U.S. markets at the time, and an understanding that there wasn't anything really serving the nuances of the direction the market was going. So that was kind of the foundation of it. At the same time, Tyler came from a space that worked in events quite a bit. And so he, I think, always had that focus on wanting to create a trade show. I want to say it was 2016 was our first Lyft Expo in Toronto. And we had built up a lot of buzz. We had built up a lot of connections with the industry. And then, like you say, the industry was just in a place where there was, frankly, a lot of money falling out of the sky from some of these larger companies. And so, they wanted to make a big splash. There was all of that excitement. There wasn't anything else serving that. And so, it was a very heady exciting time. I would say from 2016 to 2018, our first Lift Expo in Toronto had 10,000 people over 2 days. It blew all of us out of the water. At that time, we were still, a little startup with a handful of people in our basement. Peter, Tyler, Natasha, myself, a couple other folks really putting those first couple events together. And it was just right place, right time, a lot of excitement, a lot of community support. And a big, it was also, there's some fun stories about that time too, that kind of highlights that dynamic that I'm sure you recall at the time of the sort of push and pull from the sort of legacy market versus this perception of the corporate market. I don't think it was our first Lift Expo. I think it was our second Lift Expo in Toronto. Happened just a few days after Project Claudia, which was a big wave of closures by Toronto police. There was a big, the green wave of new dispensaries that opened up pre-legalization in Toronto. And then a big action over the course of 1 or 2 days where Toronto police kind of shut them all down. And it really heightened that sense that there's this, two competing narratives or directions for the cannabis industry.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Because in those days, micros weren't considered at the time.
No, it was all
so really
big,
you just
one
saw
size
the
fits
big,
all. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's right. The big, we'll call them the big boys coming in. They had tons of capital behind them. Some crazy individuals as well. Which
some personalities, certainly, yeah.
There's some personalities in there. So and that was the go-to event for anyone involved in the industry. That was the go-to event. Everyone wanted to make sure they were there. Didn't matter how much it cost, right? We need a booth this big. We need ceiling hangers. We need everything going on. We need lights. We need camera. We need everything you could come in with. And then that drastically changed almost overnight. It felt. What was that? What was the catalyst? Like, where was it? Just people were seeing the writing on the wall with investments, micro licensing.
You mean in terms of the shift, like kind of where Lyft is
just
now
the shift,
versus
Not even so much where like how it got there, but it was more events obviously entered the scene as well. They seen opportunity, but what was that shift? Like what? Because it wasn't just one thing. It was like a perfect storm almost.
Yeah, I think it's reflective of the trajectory of the overall industry, right? There was a lot of hype in the buildup to legalization. You talked about, the kind of money a company could spend on a booth. That's not real. I feel like I was one of the few people, honestly, that was looking around at the time saying, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't add up. And so I really wasn't all that surprised to see things kind of decline, but I would say it's just a reflection of the direction of the industry. I mean, the companies that were supporting those types of events, many of them don't exist anymore. Some of the bigger guys do, but that's not really the focus of their energy. And it was just serving a different thing. In 2016, a Lift Expo, this was entirely still a medical regime. It was not non-medical, adult use, recreational. And so it was a great opportunity for licensed producers at the time. It was one of the few places where they can come and interact with their consumers, with their patients. And I heard that from a lot of people, walking around talking to the booth holders was, this was amazing. We love this. It's great customer loyalty building because these are people that I talked to on the phone. They had, and now I get to finally meet them in person. That dynamic has shifted, right? With legalization, there's a lot of other ways for companies to engage with the public. In addition, there's just not the money there to justify, events that cost, $1 million+ to put on. That's why we're seeing smaller, savvier events these days. There's still a demand for them in the industry. But the days of Lyft 2017, 2018 was a high watermark. The industry was at a higher watermark. Look at the stock prices, around that time and look at their trajectory afterwards. And I think that tells the exact same story across all these companies. And I think, there's an interesting pivot point where you talk about the direction of, where the industry is going. And I think that people see that decline. And if you look at that decline through a certain limited context, it looks like doom and gloom. But I think there's another side of that, which is, that's the decline of companies that never made sense, companies that could spend a ridiculous amount of money throwing parties with no real ROI. Now we're getting to a place where for companies to survive, they actually have to, run on basic fundamentals. This is a consumer packaged good. This is farming. And the companies I talk to in my work at Stratcann that are not they don't have a big public presence. They're not screaming at the top of their lungs, but they're doing well, and they're finding a way to get into this market. And that's part of what I try to do at Stratcann, I guess, is tell that side of the story as well. So that, because it pains me when I talk to people inside and outside of the industry, that their perception is, it's all kind of collapsed.
It's all doom and gloom. Yeah.
And collapsed in the context of it's no longer that heyday of 2017, 2018, 2019.
Or viable. So many are looking at it going, this just isn't even viable. Like I've spent the money, I've got my build out, I've got plants, I'm getting product, but it's not viable. And it's like, there is still opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity.
These are products people want to consume. Yes, excise taxes are very high. Everyone knows that.
Sure.
Operating, a lot of challenges, operating costs, but the companies I'm seeing that are successful are small and nimble and built their businesses around the known knowns of the market and not, the companies that aren't doing well, I think are the ones that built their business around a theory of what the industry might be.
Right.
A lot of the businesses, if you read the market reports and projections in the lead up to legalization from groups like Deloitte, they were talking about $10 or $12 a gram retail. And I remember at the time, there were many of us saying, no, that's not the case. And in fact,
I ain't fucking paying that. What are you, you're fine.
The market would never support that. And so, though we're not surprised that, prices are much lower than that now. It's just a lot of the, that I think goes back to that sort of corporate suits narrative, right? Where there was a story that they could spin that people wanted to buy. But at the end of the day, that's not what this industry is. And the implosion of that isn't the implosion of the industry. The implosion of that is sort of the inevitable rise and fall of a stock market buzz, similar to what we saw in, late 90s, early 2000s, but didn't mean the internet died.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's funny because looking at that, I'm watching a series documentary now about WeWork. And so it's called We Crashed. And there's so many parallels in any of these companies that you've seen do this. And in our case, it's an industry. But seeing that play out and the way things have happened, there's a future for this industry, obviously. We wouldn't be here. We know what's going on. But you reminded me about the big, and I won't call it patient, but everyone referred to it as that. So in the early days, 16, 17, even into 18, it was a big patient grab. It was who can sign up as many patients. Emblem was doing very well in those days, Aurora, obviously. And that's where it remained for the longest of times until, adult use regulations came about. And then that kind of filtered. And it's funny that I'm wearing Mendo today because, obviously huge in the medical side. But are we seeing a return to medical? Like I know that the patient count, I can't even say patient. What do you even call it anymore? What's the proper terminology?
I think they still say patient. Frankly, I've always kind of disliked that
customers.
term. Yeah, they're consumers. They're
because
customers.
It's not a prescription. It's not. Yeah, we'll call it. Because you said it right, which is a recommendation from your doctor. I remember that day and when I got my recommendation from the doctor and how many grams a day I was allowed. But are we seeing a return to that at all? Like, because I do know that registrations are ticking up depending on which medical supplier you speak with. But do you see that returning at all? And if so, why?
No, in fact, I think, from the numbers I'm seeing, I think it's a bit of the opposite. And it's not all that surprising. I think we're seeing some of the non-medical market sort of taking away the demand for the use of medical side. And I think we've seen new registrants slowing down, certainly, especially from that initial trajectory. There was a bit of a bump, I think, during COVID, where you suddenly saw a lot of people saying, oh, I want to access this way instead of dealing with stores. And so that changed the trajectory a little bit. But I think it's not all that surprising to me that a lot of the people who are going through those hoops to access through the medical space, once legalization is relatively mature and it's pretty easy to just walk down the street and buy it at the store, a lot of those people aren't going to jump through those hoops. So that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I think there's also
unless you have maybe insurance adjudication or you're a veteran or something like that. But you're right. And that's in selection. I mean, the early days for us, as a medical customer, I still want to go to patient. But it was all about selection. I remember my friends that were vets, they're, switching prescriptions or moving your recommendation or your, from one to another. It was kind of unknown that you could even do it in the early days and splitting scripts and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it was always selection. I'm going, yeah, okay, you've got decent product and you're rotating your strains. That's, yeah. But you wanted a larger selection. And some of these, like Mendo and Herbal Dispatch and some of these other ones, they've done a good job at curating their menus. So, but I think that it makes the most sense probably under those that have some sort of coverage, whether it's a health spend account, you're a veteran, then it makes sense, right? Because it's covered, right?
Oh, and there are a lot of, upsides, I think, to it. I mean, having it,
sure.
being able to order directly from the producer and have it delivered to your door is great. If I order from the BC cannabis store here in BC, they don't even deliver it to my door because they make me sign for it. So I have to go to the post office to pick it up. If I order medical, magically they can deliver it directly to my door. And I think that in some ways it's arguably quite good for the medical system, the integrity of the medical system, that a lot of those folks that are, sort of borderline medical, my back hurts, if they can be served by the non-medical space so that the medical professionals are dealing with people that have much more cannabis specific issues that they're addressing with that as a medicine. I think that's important for the integrity of the system. So, from a financial standpoint, I'm sure some of the licensed producers don't like seeing some of those declines, especially long term. But I think, there will always be people looking to access that program. And I think the more integrity it has, the more integrity that brings to the concept of medical cannabis. And I think
for sure. What have you, I don't know how much you keep your eye on what's going on in the US. Obviously you probably do, but was there anything similar happening in, say, California or Colorado where, medical, adult use, and then a roll off on the medical side or a ramp back up, like any similarities or parallels there?
I wish I had an answer to that. Yeah, I don't actually know that.
Okay.
And it would also be a different equation because, the US is different.
It's not federal and
yeah, exactly. People often, I was just talking with someone last week about the numbers in California, and there are often a lot of parallels between California and Canada just because of the timeline and history. Right. But, it's still, quote unquote legal in a country that isn't legal. And so there's a ton.
So fucked to me still.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind.
And that leads to a lot of export out of state, right? So, there's still a massive black market in those places, and it's dwindling now that a lot of other legal U.S. states have. Frankly, Colorado was an interesting move because it, previous to Colorado legalizing in 2012, I think, finally came into force in 2014, California was the powerhouse of cannabis production for, frankly, North America, but certainly for Canada or for the U.S. Obviously, a lot of other regions, but if you lived in the U.S. And you were getting cannabis, you were most likely getting it from California. Colorado legalizing that really shifted that because they're a lot closer to the East Coast than California, and so that changed that equation a lot. And that's changing even more now. More states are coming on, but I think that's one of the challenges in looking at the effects of legalization in those states. Is you always have to look at it in the context of it's quasi legal, but a lot of that is still leaving the state. So even their sales numbers, you have, someone from Nebraska driving to Colorado. Well, once Nebraska finally legalizes, that's going to lower legal sales in the Colorado market. It will be, it's going to be really interesting to see if and when, how the U.S. finally harmonizes all of that into something coherent at the federal level. It's on one hand, the state first approach is pretty great because it's a bit more kind of libertarian cowboy approach. But I think long term, it's going to be really messy. And I think the approach Canada took, it's not as sexy. But I think long term, we're creating a foundation that is a lot more manageable for a viable, relatively healthy industry.
Yeah.
So David, do you think that, like, because we had Michael Uckle on last week, and he was talking a lot about the U.S. market, and we asked him questions about when they legalize. Do you feel like the writing is on the wall for a lot of, or at least a handful of Canadian cannabis brands once the U.S. does fully legalize? Like, they got experience down there in California with better packaging. They're allowed to market on their package. The labels and stuff are better, and all these different benefits that they've got that they haven't been kind of restricted on.
And when you say writing on the wall, you mean kind of at end times for Canada, and that those U.S. brands might start to dominate here in Canada?
We're having troubles with exports and stuff like that too. And when the U.S. starts exporting, the writing might be on the wall there too. So just that whole general, the general alley.
Yeah, I think, what you mentioned on the export side, if and when, the U.S. finally has a fully federal legal system that can operate with the international market in the way that Canada can, absolutely. At the same time, I don't think it's sort of end times for the Canadian industry. And I don't think a lot of US brands will necessarily infiltrate the domestic market. Although, as a side note, it's always interesting to me to see how much Canadians love to see some of these US cannabis brands come up here.
What would make them, do they just look at the market? Because we've got a saturated fucking market. And I'm going, it's going to take a lot of communications, right? A lot of marketing, a lot of presence. Why? Like, why would they think that this is an opportunity? But then you see, so Jeter's has distribution. I don't know how well their sales are doing, but they're competing with general admission when it comes to, it's ebb and flow, back and forth, right? But why? Why would they want to come into Canada? I've always questioned that. Do you have insight?
I have a lot of theories, certainly. On one hand, it works to a degree. I think it's not without reason that US companies look at the Canadian market and say, hey, we think there's some demand there. I think a lot of Canadian consumers, for a whole host of reasons, sometimes look at what's going on in the US as this forbidden fruit. And so when it comes up here, it's like, oh, it's this exciting thing. Now, there's some brands that we can point to where I think, proves that they weren't able to meet those expectations. And those brands have kind of fallen off. There's arguably a few others, at least maybe one other I can think of that we're talking about here that seems like maybe it's, going toe to toe. So on one hand, I think that's part of it. I remember a joke we told back in the Lyft days, because there was often a conversation of, Lyft is corporate. And we would see people saying that while they're wearing a Leafly hat, a Leafly shirt. Leafly is owned by Privateer, and so there's that dynamic, I think, where some Canadians, we have this dislike of our own things. And so we look outside of our boundaries and think, oh, everything's better over there. So I think that's part of it. I think there's also the brashness of, Americans thinking, oh, well, we're going to go into that market and dominate. Of course we are. I think sometimes, a lot of it's just branding. A lot of it is sometimes maybe a misunderstanding of the market. You can't it's pretty difficult, let's say, to bring up genetics from, the US.
It's almost always just the brand.
Exactly.
Literally just the brand.
Exactly.
And many fail to realize that.
Exactly.
There have been, though, as you've experienced and you've seen, there have been US genetics that get up here, but they are not producing kilos and shipping it across the border. It's not coming in that way.
No. And that, that's what it is at the end of the day. It comes down to branding, and, consumers of all different types of products might sometimes like to think they're particularly savvy, but we can look at overall trends and see that people will pay a lot of money for something if you put the right branding, a logo on it. It could be, the same tap water, but you're going to spend $10 a bottle because Brad Pitt, drank it or whatever. And not above that, I think we all fall for that in our own ways.
Sure.
But so that's successful. We see it here in Canada too. There's a whole lot of something I've been wanting to write about for a little while now, and I'm not quite sure how to frame it. But one of the things we're seeing in Canada right now is kind of the downfall of the toll processors and brokers. In the early days of legalization here in Canada, one of the misunderstood aspects and gatekeepers in this market was the provinces. Everyone's always focused on Ottawa, Health Canada, boom, the federal government. And they didn't pay attention to the fact that these provinces are all the gatekeepers, and especially in the early days. But still, many of the provinces prefer to deal with the big guys. And so that created a situation where if you're a little guy, you can't get into these provincial markets because they won't talk to you. And so you have to go through a brand house of some kind and selling just kind of wholesale B2B. And so you had these brands building up, and there are lots of examples of them where it was just a well-marketed brand. And then you had buyers going around the country emptying out vaults of failing companies who, they might have had good cannabis. It might not have been good cannabis, but the problem was they couldn't, get it to the, through the provinces into stores. And so they're sitting on cannabis with declining value. These well-financed companies can come in, scoop it up very cheaply, slap a nice brand on it, get out there in the market. And I know how the sausage is made. And then I see the reviews on, the OCS. I think we all go to the OCS on Reddit to kind of get our temperature of what consumers are thinking. And it's always been fascinating to me to see that, you spritz some terps on something and market it correctly. And consumers who think they are, very discerning will fall over themselves.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think we see over time that people start to figure it out, right? And they realize, hey, man, those first couple batches of this were really good. In the last year,
it's almost a bait and switch. It's like a bait and switch
100%.
almost. And whether they're doing it on purpose or not, I'm not going to say that, but it feels like it in some cases. Like, holy shit, this is really good cannabis product. And then all of a sudden a decline. And you're like, okay, factors have not changed. You still have the same master grower. Not a big fan of that term, but master grower, same cultivation team, same processing team. You're using the same processing facility. What the fuck's going on?
Right. But that's the thing. It's not the same grower. It's not, you know what I mean? A lot of these companies are not actually growing it themselves. They're just going out.
Yeah, they were just procuring it. Yeah.
But that's what's shifting is a lot of the companies they were sourcing their product from are gone now, right? That's a way, that's a facet of the sort of, giant wave of a lot of people getting licensed. Oh, I'm going to grow weed and become a millionaire. And then you're sitting there with a vault. And the general narrative that people often have is like, oh, they couldn't make money because of excise taxes or the stupid federal government or whatever. And there's a lot of truth to those narratives, but what people don't realize is you could still have the greatest weed. You could have built your business around, understanding what the excise taxes are. But if you didn't have the luck and right place at the right time to get into the right provinces, suddenly you're over a barrel. And if you don't have the finances to handle a couple year runway to figure things out, suddenly you're distressed. And this guy comes along and says, hey, I'll give you 50 cents a gram for that. You're like, well, shit, I can at least pay a couple bills with this. But long term, those companies go away. And so that's the point.
Yeah.
And I've got an article coming out next week touching on this. I'm hoping to get into it a little bit more, but we're starting to see a shift now where B2B prices are starting to go up. And we're moving from a buyer's market to a seller's market. And that's huge. That means a little bit more money for the actual growers. A lot of consumers don't realize that, they're paying maybe $10 a gram. Those growers are getting like $1 to $3 a gram tops.
It's fucking, oh my God, it drives me insane. There was I want to get your feedback on it because I don't know if it was Adam Coates, I forget who it was, Wes, that mentioned about the stickers, right? So similar to what we see at the gas station, at the pumps, where it spells out very clearly, this much is how much you're paying for gas, this is how much you're paying for taxes. And only in the history of Canada now is our cost of living, we're paying, oh my God. Not going to go there. Tom, you're not going to go there. You're just going to stay away from it for a bit.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this though, David, because in that distribution model, it's an area we've been trying to understand ourselves quite a bit lately with a project that we've got on the go. So are you saying then that some of these companies that exist, the producer processors, mostly producers, if they don't have, so if I'm a provincial buyer, in order to make it into the market, what are the factors? And I know every province is different, but can you supply me with the same product quality consistently, this amount? Is that part of the factor that they're looking at and why some of them just can't make it? Or where are they struggling the most, where they just can't get it into the provinces? They can't get the distribution from, say, OCS or BCLD or whoever it might be. And then that's where they're falling through the cracks. What is the catalyst there?
Yeah, there's no one reason. It's really going to be different for each company. I mean, frankly, and this is the piece that a lot of people don't want to say, so I'll just say it. I mean, the reality is a lot of these businesses are just not well put together. You could be a really good grower. It doesn't mean you know how to run a business. You can be an amazing chef. It doesn't mean you know how to run a restaurant. So, unfortunately, that's a large chunk of this is not understanding some of the dynamics that are going to go into any highly regulated business. Running a coffee shop is, razor thin margins. It's not just cannabis. So that's part of it. Maybe they put their business together. They think, hey, I'm really good at growing weed, but they didn't have all the other pieces in mind of, well, how am I going to market this? How am I going to brand this? You're likely not going to convince those provincial buyers to pick up your product if you're some new company they've never heard of and you don't have a track record. And if your business plan didn't take that into account, hey, these first few crops I need to sell at a huge loss just to get into the market so that I can get some demand, so that I can turn around and parlay that into, some actual market share. That's a piece of it. I kind of like to bash on the provinces a little bit just because I feel like people sometimes overlook it. But at the end of the day, these are businesses. They have to take, take certain things into account. And these are distribution centers that need to operate efficiently, and dealing with a whole lot of individual small businesses is not really very practical or viable. Now, there's some criticisms to be made that maybe they shouldn't have built their model around something that's so top heavy. But then at the end of the day, centralized distribution, that's how it's going to work. We can sort of dive into some of the nuances that BC's doing with direct delivery to address some of those challenges. The highly flawed but improving slowly flow-through system Ontario is similar. People talk about the pros and cons in Manitoba and Saskatchewan with, producers going direct to retail. A lot of people like to think that's this amazing thing. A lot of producers hate it because it's a pain in the butt to sell 20, 30, 100 stores. Individual shipments. Yeah.
Could you imagine being a business and you're like, okay, I've got the product, I've grown the product, I've harvested it, I've cured it, I've packaged it, I've done everything. And I even done some marketing this month. And now I need to send out to 200 different retailers.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's madness. So 2 questions then. One is, because I'm glad you brought up provinces, which province is doing it best right now in your mind?
That's a good question. I would only base it on when I talk to people and ask them who actually deal with them and ask this question. BC honestly gets pretty high marks. Alberta gets pretty low marks these days because they prefer the top-down model. They prefer to just deal with a handful of really big guys. So there are little, even mid-sized producers in Alberta that have to sell out of the province.
Yeah.
Ontario gets beat up a lot. At the same time, the people who know how to work the program, like it. The complainers always kind of, are louder than the people who have positive things to say.
Always.
So it's in a lot of ways, it's comparing apples and oranges, right? I mean, every system's a little bit different, but people really seem to like that BC has weekly product calls. It's not the, 4 annual product calls of Ontario. New Brunswick.
Which is still confusing to me, very confusing, because there's 2 different dates. And if you're on a GL versus a flow through, it's this date. And it's like, oh my God.
It's very
I couldn't
complex.
imagine supplying to Ontario.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But in their defense, it's, the world's biggest cannabis distribution center. It's a lot of factors to take into account. And so, it's not just, they're a bunch of stupid government idiots or whatever. It's
not even close. I mean, the team is intelligent. And we've got close ties. They help us with some of the, what we report on and throw out. But I would never be up for the challenge. Like, there's just no way trying to figure that out. But the other question then that I have though is, because during your licensing process with Health Canada, I come in, I'm going to be a full vert. If I'm crazy enough, I'm going to be a full vert. New app. I've got, record keeping, everything's figured out. In there is marketing plan, a small amount about what is your marketing plan. Does Health Canada ask any questions around distribution? This is one thing I've never really looked at in the application. I haven't looked at one in, 4 or 5 years. But do they ask about how you will gain distribution, any fallbacks if you can't? And it's not up to Health Canada. That's not where I'm going is, they need to assess your business plan, see if it's solid. But there are factors they look at.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, though, that, ultimately that's not what they're looking at. So, I mean, your, overall business plan that you're presenting in your application, may take some of those things into account, but that's not the boxes they're ticking. I think it raises an interesting question. I mean, if we were to, start over, it would be nice to bake something like that into the plan. At the same time, you could see the obvious argument that it's not really the government's job to make sure you're a viable business.
It's not. No, but when you're turning out license, and I know it's slowed down. We pay attention to everything you post each week. At Ample, we used to watch every week because it was like, they got license. Let's send them a congrats, right?
Get the sales reps on the phone.
Get the sales reps on the phone. But I mean, so it has slowed, but I just think that there'd be less hardship potentially if just in the inception stage, it's like, okay, guys, maybe even Health Canada actually offers some sort of crash course, and maybe they already do. I don't know. But understanding the business, understanding distribution. If you're in this province, you need to be able to get in this one. And if you can't, marketing is challenging. You have to take to certain socials. You have to be able to do this and that. We've seen so many. Yeah, we've seen the big ones with investment, but we've also seen friends and family that have lost fortunes, their livelihoods, going all in. Good people, great product. And they didn't make it. And it wasn't because necessarily the margins are too tight and they don't know how to run a business. It's all of a sudden they hit a wall on, holy fuck, now I gotta deal with, I need to get in Ontario. How am I gonna, oh my God, now the product calls. Oh, they didn't like this. They want this, but they want the terps or the THC potency to be this. And they want it in, nope, they've already got that category filled. So now I need to go and it's nutty to me. And I do get, and I'm not saying it's the government's job, nor do I want the government. If Health Canada is listening, I do not want you involved necessarily, but some sort of inflection to go, maybe we should help them a little bit more or provide some sort of service to help them understand it a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on one hand, that's probably one of the flaws of having a health agency as the primary, organization behind this. there are, to a degree, some programs that Health Canada has baked into the process that address some of the issues that you're talking about. The specific thing that comes to my mind is the Indigenous Navigator, which is a more streamlined licensing process, gives you more direct access to Health Canada through the process. There's an acknowledgement of the sort of black hole that licensing is otherwise. When I was there, I actually put a whole bunch of time into building something like that for the microsystem. It's called the Micro Navigator program. For whatever reason, they didn't go anywhere with it after I left, unfortunately. But there was talk. I mentioned that in that there was talk. I was working with my managers. There was support of that idea. So I think there, potentially traction for those kinds of things there. So if anyone there is watching and there's any policymakers looking for something to kind of build their name around, maybe they could develop something like that there. But I think,
that sounds brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. And we know it's working in the Indigenous side.
To a degree, absolutely. A lot of Indigenous applicants that I've spoken to really like that program. They have positive.
Yeah, I was going to say better than if nothing's perfect, but better than if we did not have it.
Yeah, absolutely. There were also some provincial programs that, in theory, were looking to address that. Unfortunately, I think some of them focused more on just the idea that, hey, let's get people licensed and everything will get fixed from there. And I think that's an example that shows that those were gaps across regulators, industry in general. Is there just wasn't a lot of thought of what do we do now? Even in the lead up to legalization, you talk about those early days when, I would do my license updates and it'd be, 15 licenses a week or something like that.
Yeah. Crazy.
My conversation with every single one of those people and Lyft, I was, one of the first guys calling them. A lot of times they didn't even know they got licensed yet. That was my question, was like, so what are you going to do now? You're just now starting the marathon. All of that was training.
Just starting.
And a lot, it's sort of the original sin of legalization. I don't know if that's the right term, but this foundation of that hype that we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, there was so much excitement, so much money falling out of the sky that it allowed a lot of people to believe I don't need a solid business plan. It's just a matter of getting a license and I become a millionaire. And that was that was true. There was a time when that was true.
Yeah.
You could, I think 2020 hindsight, you could go back and change some aspects of federal licensing to have addressed that. At the same time, it was a wave that there wasn't a whole lot that could be done. These companies saw the opportunity to take advantage of the hype. And so they were jumping into it. And I don't know what you could really do to say, no, you're not allowed to do that.
Right.
But conversely, developing some agencies and some programs that can try to handhold some of those license holders. That's why I like the idea of a micro licensing program, because it was something to address the companies that are much more likely to be the individuals who are like taking out a second mortgage. I talk to a lot of those people and my heart goes out. I put my shingle up after I left Health Canada and took on, some clients for licensing. But, I'll be honest, I very quickly saw how predatory that space was, because you had people, 9 out of 10 people that came to me, they had no idea what they were doing, but they were ripe to be scammed out of money, frankly. And I, constantly turned people down. I constantly told people, you don't have a business plan. But there were plenty of consultants out there. And I actually watched it happen where I turned someone down and a year later they got licensed because someone else was willing to take their money.
Yeah.
They were filling a need. People wanted to give them their money, but it's a shame that I just talked to someone earlier this year who wanted to transition to the black market in Ontario. And he told me his business plan. I was like, man, you don't have a business plan. Stay in the black market. If what you're doing is working, and, but come up with a plan to pivot. I don't think the black market, we talked about that earlier too. And the black market is dying. I don't there's the headlines like to paint it a different way. The black market is absolutely dying in Canada too. That's not a long-term place to be, but if it's working for you now, keep bringing in that money and then come up with a way to transition. There will be opportunities, but you need a plan. You need to know how to market. Saying I grow the greatest weed ever is not, that worked in 2015.
Yeah, well, that's the USP of literally 100 plus companies right now. I've got the best weed. You go into a sales rep goes into a retail. What's so special? I grow the best weed. This is the best weed you've ever had.
That's not it's not a business
come up with
plan.
Something new, people.
Yeah, and in fact,
it may be
what we talked about earlier with those companies that clear out the vaults, as they say. That proves that you don't. Having good weed is kind of the least important. It's branding. It's a business model. Honestly, consumers will buy the fancy package thing. They don't. We see
they'll buy it at least once.
Yes.
At least once,
Yes.
and then can you get a repeat out of it? It's hard to say, but the demographics are all different as well, though, right? So you've got your middle-aged versus your Gen Zs and where they're sitting on, expectations of product. And it's just really strange to me right now. I don't even want to go into it, but I do want to ask a little bit because you've had a bunch of different articles, but the most recent, we've been talking about black market. Many in this industry, excuse me, many in this industry cut their teeth there. They made the transition. We know of so many. I won't mention any names, even myself. MMA, our guy, wasn't consuming everything. My numbers are always out. But that being said, we do see a lot of chatter around the black market still eating our lunch. They're still getting away with way too much. And then as of most recent, you put out the article about the illegal or illicit, however we want to frame it, whatever we want to call it, black market.
I like
at the end of the day,
unregulated seems to be the
unregulated
seems to be the least offensive term to use.
Yeah. So and one could sit back and go, you see varying degrees of comments and sides on it, right? Which is, one is, we don't have enough law enforcement to be able to deal with it. Well, a cop isn't going to just drive by and go, that's illegal, I'm going to go and shut it down. That's not the way it fucking works, people. Okay, it doesn't. There's massive investigation. Who owns what? Who's involved? They need to be able to stand up in court, right? What are you seeing? I'm going to just give you the floor on it. What are you seeing in the black market? Because you made a point of saying it is actually going away, but the reports that we see consistently are not of that. So it's yours.
Yeah.
Speak about the black market.
So I think great place to start is that article you mentioned I posted earlier this week that's talking about the proliferation of illegal stores in Ontario, especially in Toronto. That is a trend we're seeing a lot of places, New Brunswick as well. They've been talking about a big spike. There's quite a few here in British Columbia.
Okay.
A lot of them in BC and New Brunswick are operating in a quasi-Indigenous First Nation space. And so sometimes that is what's behind the proliferation there is both of those provincial governments tend to not prioritize enforcement within those communities for a whole host of kind of political and social reasons that are, there's a lot of nuance there. In Ontario, it's a little different. But my comment about the black market dying is more a bigger picture. When we're looking at the numbers is around 70-30, they're saying of purchases coming from the licit market versus illicit market. And so, long-term, the trajectory we're seeing is that dominance, pre-legalization was 100%. It's, nowhere near 100%, and that number is declining annually. So I think we're seeing consolidation in that space. We're seeing it dwindling out. There are certainly niche players still operating, but I think for the most part, it's consolidated into a handful of really large producers and buyers. And that's what's supplying the online stores, the moms, which, have proliferated certainly since legalization because a lot of the old stores moved online. And then the newer trend that we're seeing, I would say in the last 6 to 12 months is starting to see some of these illegal brick and mortar stores or unregulated, unlicensed brick and mortar stores making a comeback. Some of them in the Indigenous space, but some of them just, being very bold and just opening up wherever.
I was going to say, it's ballsy, man. Like I couldn't imagine going, yep, fuck it. I'm going to get all black market product. I'm moving into, and the lease, like how the hell are they getting a lease unless they own the space? Like, because there is confusion. Let's not forget, like landlords are people.
Yes.
And even uneducated consumers are people. So sometimes they don't even know.
Yes.
Right. Because they're getting, the black market is very, and why wouldn't they be?
And
they're
even
following very
even a
similar
cop,
THC logos.
Even a city official might, if they're not paying attention, that's not going to stand out now in the way it did pre-legalization. So that's part of it. Part of it that we touched on in that article and you talked about is, the complexities of enforcement. Ontario has a more piecemeal approach depending on the municipality. And so Toronto, it seems like it's a somewhat lower priority than other communities. One of the things, Paul, that I was talking about in that article, he pointed to BC and New Brunswick as examples he'd like to see Ontario take, which is a more harmonized provincial approach that sort of deputizes inspectors. That's one of the issues in Toronto right now is it's primarily an inspection issue and inspectors don't want to go into these places. They're kind of scared. Frankly, a lot of them are connected.
Can you blame them?
Crime. No, absolutely. And, police are saying, look, we don't have the money. We have other priorities. Frankly, I think that's true. I also think that's politics. Every agency is always going to say we need more money and the police are always asking for more money. The police, at the same time, the police probably do need more money. I don't know. There's a lot of bad dudes out there. So If they're dealing with fentanyl and car thefts and, child trafficking.
Yeah, let's keep focusing on that for a while. But at the same time, I mean, so we know the provinces are making out very well when it comes to the taxation, right?
Yes.
And I don't know where, like, if anyone is doing well, it's the provinces when it comes to tax.
Absolutely.
But,
and
like, we don't see the reports. Maybe you see them or you pay attention to them. Like, how much because in the early days, that's what we preached, right? We preached that part of it was going to be that, and it would go to law enforcement. I don't know from that amount of tax collected is actually going to law enforcement.
Great question. And here's a little shout. If there are any investigative reporters out there who want to work with me on this, the story I've been trying to cover for a while, it's a complex issue. And that's why I haven't really been able to do it justice. We have touched on it a little bit, talking about some of the police budgets, where some of the money is going.
Mm-hmm.
But my reporting up to this point has often been just saying, hey, this is really opaque. Where is it going? A lot of it was, there's a lot of political promises about where that money was supposed to go at the provincial level that frankly has not been borne out. Ontario is actually one of the better ones in terms of what their promises were and what they transparently did in terms of delivering that money to different municipalities. Now, at the same time, when you look at those numbers, like British Columbia, for example, I think has brought in around $325 million probably currently just in their share of federal excise taxes.
Yeah.
That's not that much in, if we look.
I'll take it.
For sure. But in the scope of budgets and things like that and what, we're talking about police budgets and stuff and it's, it goes to this municipality, you can see quickly it sort of breaks apart. So it's not this windfall. That said, there, I would love to see someone really dive into exactly where that money has gone. I think a lot of it, frankly, just goes into public coffers. It just helps them pad their budget for other things. One of the things I've been, slightly different subject, but one of the things I've been trying to push for here in BC is the BC government loves to pay lip service. We support our, craft growers and the Kootenays, blah, blah, blah. I've been saying, well, we'll take 1% of that windfall that you guys are getting it and provide some grants to help some of these. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's the same argument that you're saying on the law enforcement side that, and I get it, if I'm a retailer and an illegal store, an unregulated store opened up across the street from me, I'm going to be pretty pissed off because I followed all the rules.
So frustrated.
And you're thinking, okay, well, certainly that person will, if I open up an illegal beer store across the street from a regulated beer store, you could bet I would probably be shut down pretty darn fast. So
it's a good point.
I get that side of things
immediately.
For sure. And that's their frustration is like, hey, we follow rules. We pay really high regulatory fees, much higher than other similar industries. It's also a difficult issue because a lot of people are going to call them prohibitionists or, you're, the legacy market is what brought us here. And I think that's an important point to bring up too is, these are not those guys. People, someone opening up a store like that today is, they're not fighting, they're not looking to get arrested and challenge this in the court for the most. Now, on the First Nation side, different story. In general, when someone just pops up in Oshawa or Toronto or something like that and opens a store, they're not, they're just looking to make a bunch of money.
It's risk reward to them.
Exactly.
Yep. They just want to cash in. Maybe they'll have it for 6 months, a year. A lot of them aren't stupid. They last for a certain amount of time. They're not here for a long time, just a good time, and away they go.
And where do those products come from? People should, where those products come from. One of the things that someone brought up to me many years ago that I thought was very telling was when you see a place like this get shut down and they can open up the same day or the next day, like nothing happened, that should tell you that these are not coming from, little old ladies with their MMAR and they've got some extra stuff that they're selling off the site.
These are very sophisticated operations. Yes. Yeah. And we've seen, that's the thing that we see, edible chocolate bar or the edibles, the chocolate bars, they have very beautiful embossed boxes. And immediately, because I've had friends in it, they're like, oh, I went to this dispensary. And I'm like, that's illegal. What are you talking about? They send a picture of the product and I go, I can tell just by the marketing on it alone they're like, well, they say it's tested. I go, they say, do they? They say it's tested. Great. Good.
Yeah. And, but that goes back to consumers and what we spoke about branding. There's there's a lot of consumers who are just going to buy what they want to buy. You can claim something's organic and a lot of consumers will look into that. You can claim that something is tested or that there was a study about a year or two ago out of Ontario that looked at a lot of those black market edibles potencies that, they're advertising 100 milligrams, 500 milligrams. Sometimes it was a fraction of that. And, another
we do see that in the legal market though too, is in the regulated where there's a discrepancy. It's not that drastic.
It's true though. And it's funny. I was the first one to cover that. There's an article on Ontario oils. I covered that in June. And frankly, it was a pretty small, what the study actually showed was a pretty small variance. And really the issue was kind of the difference in the labeling on the website, not the labeling on the packages. Right. Since then, it's been picked up by several other outlets that seem to try to frame it as like it's this huge discrepancy on the legal side. Quite the difference. Yeah. If I was buying a 500 milligram edible and it's actually 50 milligrams, I mean, that's an enormous discrepancy. Yet it has also led to a lot of people, frankly, thinking their tolerance is way higher. I see people all the time, 10 milligrams is ridiculous. I need 500. And I've taught, in their defense, there's a couple people I've confronted about this and since then, and they're like, you know what, you were right. I can, a 10 milligram edible hits me. And I saw some people on Twitter in the early days of legalization saying there's something wrong with these edibles because the 10 milligrams shouldn't be hitting me this hard. And I just thought, no, you've just been, you don't, anyway. And I know, there are medical patients out there that need very high amounts, but it's a narrative that I see all the time. I'm a medical patient. I've been using cannabis oil for chronic pain basically every day for 10 years now. 10 or 20 milligrams does me just fine. I find it, really hard to believe that there's a massive amount of people that need that much on a daily basis.
Yeah.
There's some, but I find it's a narrative that gets pushed more to push a sort of political conversation rather than, frank analysis of the facts at hand.
Yeah, I think the information is out there, and for our audience, just look into it. Excise stamps, obviously, you're going to know black market product if it doesn't have it. I don't think they're counterfeiting them yet. They might be. I mean, we're not at the state yet where we see in California with the vapes, right? The counterfeit vapes, like that's a major issue, or it was. I don't know if they've solved it now, but there was any counterfeiting technologies that had rolled out, and people can scratch and scan, and is this legit? It takes you to the website. Canada might get there. Who knows? I'm not sure. Anyways, enough about that. Let's understand Stratcann, forward-looking, what all you got on the go. Stratcann. If you're not tuning in and at least subscribe to Stratcann, number one, do that. We're smart enough. I love when the recaps come in. But we see you on socials. You're on LinkedIn. You're on Instagram. You're all over the place. It's the most up to date as far as I don't know, because you've got a smaller team doing it. It's yourself and a few people, right? Like it's
we are busy. There's a lot of news. I'll tell you what, I wish these financial reports have become the bane of my existence. Luckily, I have someone covering them for me, but they like to come all at once, obviously, and crying out loud, guys.
Yeah. I don't know how you keep up with it. Obviously, it keeps you in tune with what's going on. But you also, outside of the media and the reporting, you're doing events. And I want to focus on that because I haven't had a chance to get to one yet. I will. But the feedback, everything we've ever seen is just all positive. So tell us about your next event that you've got going on and what they look like.
Yeah, our next event is actually next, I'm not sure when this airs, so I'll say next Tuesday, but it's on August.
This will be on tomorrow.
Okay, great. It's so it's August 20th. So just next week in Ottawa. We call this series of events Growing Relationships. We just held one in BC a couple months ago, sold out show in BC. We had a sold out show in Calgary about a month prior to that. This is a smaller event series that we bring to some of the smaller markets in Canada, really focused on content. We're partnering with Tether now, who is hosting their bud tender event in the evening. And we're hosting kind of our networking event in the day. And the idea is, rather than some of these bigger events, for one that, require a pretty big buy-in, I'm trying to build events that serve these small independent businesses who, maybe they can get out for one day, but they can't afford or, frankly, be away from their business long enough to kind of party for 3 days at some of these bigger events. So what we do is we get everyone in one day. We have some very focused regulatory conversations. In the morning, I like to do what I call a regulatory roundtable, where we get everyone talking with each other about some of those issues in the industry. One of the things I preface that conversation with is I don't want to hear anything about excise taxes or 10 milligrams. We all know those are issues. It's not some kind of profound statement. And so I'm pushing people to have, more nuanced conversations about the million other things that can be addressed in this industry. Sometimes that's federal, sometimes that's provincial, sometimes that's B2B. And the kind of feedback I get from people after these events tells me that I'm looking in the right direction, because people are having very profound conversations and building connections from these events because of these conversations. So I think that's really great. We also have a speed networking session that we do a little bit different than some of the other groups where we're putting kind of retailers front and center, gives producers a chance to connect directly with retailers. And then we have a big regulatory panel in the afternoon as well for the Ontario one. We've got some Ontario and Quebec producers and then Ontario retailers.
Oh, cool.
And we'll have a big in-depth discussion about what's going on at the provincial level. And we'll definitely also be talking about the recent regulatory proposal package from Health Canada and all the changes there. So yeah, it's a different approach. It's kind of similar to what I was doing with the Lyft main stage back in the day of trying to curate, topical, timely conversations at its core, frankly, without, the $100,000 booths surrounding it. So that's our upcoming one. And then we have a lot of plans for a big series of events in 2020, 2025 that hopefully we'll have more information about the next month.
Very cool. I love that you have it framed as growing relationships. And I think that's so important this day and age, right? We're so young in the industry still, and there's so many that are struggling, but there's also ones that have succeeded. But just, having the opportunity to have those conversations about what's working, not working, where is reform needed potentially. Glad that you're tabling the proposal, and you can have an open conversation about that in an environment that you've got stakeholders, right? It's not armchair quarterbacks over here going, I think they should do this 10 milligrams. No, we need 50. And right. So these are individuals that are feeling the pain in some cases, but also their successes and what is working. So kudos on that, man, because I think it's a shift from what we've seen. And I think it's very necessary. Also, we love Katie. We love the Tether team.
She's great. Yeah, they're great.
Great people. We love the format of their events as well. But also affordability is important. I think in this time that we're living with, forget about all the economic pressures of everything going on, but operating a business, it's not easy. So anyways, David, we could talk to you for hours, man. We know you've got lots to do. But thank you so much for joining Legacies, sharing your story, and all the chaos that's going on in the industry. It's nice to keep up with that. But we have one thing before we wrap up. So what we do is we have last week's guest pose a question to the incoming guest, in this case, you, and then you get to pose a question to next week's guest. And we don't share who it is, so they didn't know who it was coming in. And I think this time it's going to be very relevant. I can't, Wes, help me out here, but Wes will read the question, and then you get to answer, and then pose one to the next guest.
Yeah. Hey, David. So last week we had Michael Elkin on, the Canada broker, and he asked if you could smoke a joint with anyone, living or dead, who would that be and why?
There's probably a million answers I could come with, but the first name that came to my mind, because I know he was a big stoner in his youth, would be Barack Obama. I'd love to ask him about all kinds of U.S. politics stuff while smoking a joint. I think that'd be interesting.
Interesting.
And then
great answer.
And then I could grab it from him and say intercepted.
Yeah.
Which was his whole thing.
Yeah.
Very
Awesome.
cool. All right.
So, now you get to ask a question of next week's guest. They may or may not be industry related. Your question doesn't have to be industry specific either. It can be whatever you want.
Anything you want. Yeah.
What is let me start over. Where do you see the Canadian cannabis industry in 5 years?
5 years. We'll mark it 2030.
Okay, perfect.
Because we're so close to 2025.
Perfect.
2030. Interesting. I hope the hell it's not where we are right now.
I think it's going to be, frankly, I think it will be a lot healthier, a lot better, a lot different, a lot more diverse. I think the trajectory we're on of the dying age of UBCOs and these floating companies is a good thing. And I think that clears room for these smaller independent companies to actually, create something viable. They're not going to become millionaires, but, they're building viable business. I think you'll see that, but it will take, more closures, more failures, unfortunately, to get to that point.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, nothing but positivity. That's what we can hope for. David, thank you so much, man. It's been awesome having you on Legacies, and we look forward to chatting with you again.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Well, I could go for hours. A lot of questions.
Yeah, I was worried there for a little bit that we might not even get to actually touch on Stratcann. But it was a good combo.
He's so ingrained in the industry. Like he just knows what's going on. He knows where the challenges are. I wish policy makers, Health Canada, provinces, they would just pay more attention. Pay more attention. He would say, I can't solve all the problems, but he's so connected across the industry and knows where all those issues are. I mean, this is what he does, right? Also, if you're an investigative journalist and you want to dig in with David, he's got a project, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
Where does all the money go? Follow the money.
I'd like to see that come to fruition for sure. For sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know. There's just so many questions I have, but anyways, nice to finally get him on and connect, and lots of success with those growing relationships.
Yep.
There's so much going on.
I guess we'll just give everyone a quick reminder again that we are off next week, so you don't expect an episode next Thursday, but we will have some highlight clips coming out for you next week, and we'll be back the week of, we'll be back on August 29th. That'll be our next episode 26, but
26.
Wow.
6
Episode
months.
25 done, wrapped up.
25 is done, yeah. And then so we've got, let's see, Growing Relationships is next week. Tether event is next week. There's Canada Golf Classic. That's the 20th, 19th, 20th, 20th, 21st, something like that. With
Lake
the
and Bake.
Harbor Groove. Lake and Bake is this weekend, Saturday. Ooh, it'll be interesting.
It's going to be nice.
I'm not looking forward to Toronto traffic. I don't even know where the harbor is, where this leaves from, but
I never am either, especially since because I don't think I've been out to Toronto other than being on the train. I don't think I've driven out there since they've closed down one of the lanes on the Gardner, which
so we'll have to look at this. We'll have to plan a route because I'm not getting stuck in traffic. PTSD, man, hate it. Anyways, all right. Well, it's a wrap for this week. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you not next week, the week after.